Thanks for listening in. Today I'm going to share a little bit about a recently published paper in which my co-author Sarah McLanahan and I unpack the drivers of racial disparities in school suspension and expulsion in the United States. We find that as early as fourth grade, in the early elementary school grades, there is a 20 percentage point gap in school suspension and expulsion, which is to say that Black students are about 2.5 times as likely as white students to be suspended or expelled. Now, these gaps have been widely published and are pretty clear, but what hasn't been explored as much is the reason for these gaps. So in spite of the pretty dramatic consequences associated with being suspended or expelled from school, which involve things like higher rates of school dropout, lower achievement, higher interaction with the criminal justice system, we don't actually know what causes these racial gaps in school suspension and expulsion. In this paper, the most important finding that we come to is that approximately 50% of the 20 percentage point gap that we observe in school suspension and expulsion can be attributed to differences in the treatment of African American or Black students who enter school with the same behaviors as their white counterparts. There's been 3 explanations put forward for this racial gap in school suspension and expulsion. The first has to do with differences in the types of schools that African American or Black and white students attend. The idea here is that Black students are more likely to attend the types of schools that are punitive in nature. These are schools that are zero-tolerance schools or no-excuses schools, and the idea is that if white students were equally likely to attend those types of schools, they too would experience just as high of rates of school suspension and expulsion as Black students. The second explanation has to do with differences in students' behaviors. The idea here is that for a variety of structural reasons, Black students come to school with more of the types of behaviors that lead to school suspension and expulsion: aggression, rule breaking, defiance, and so forth. Now, this explanation has gained very little support in the literature, and there's a growing consensus that this doesn't account for that much of the gap in school suspension and expulsion. The third explanation has to do with differences in the treatment or support offered to African American or Black students within the same types of schools as white students. So the idea here is that Black and white students who start school with the same types of behaviors are more likely to be treated harshly in terms of their school suspension and expulsion than white students, even though they have the same types of behaviors when they enter school. This explanation has gained a lot of support in lab experiments, but we don't know whether this finding holds when we put it in comparative testing relative to the other 2 explanations. This finding we think is really important because it has pretty serious implications for policy. So the idea is that these different explanations are linked to sort of different points of policy intervention, or suggest that different points of policy intervention could be useful. And so what our findings suggest is that rather than trying to sort of change the nature of punitive discipline specifically within minority-serving schools, that there's also some amount of racial bias or interpersonal discrimination taking place, whereby Black and white students who attend the same schools and enter a school with the same behaviors are getting differentially treated. And so the idea is that we would want to think about how we could reform the ways that punitive discipline sanctions are assigned, even among Black and white students in the same schools.